Over 35 million American seniors take it every single day. It sits in medicine cabinets across the country, prescribed without hesitation, refilled without question. The drug is atorvastatin, and your doctor almost certainly never told you what it actually does to a body over 70. Not the muscle pain, not the liver numbers, the other effects. The ones buried in research, flagged quietly by the FDA back in 2012, and confirmed again in 2025 medical reports that most patients will never see. The prescription leaflet lists the basics. It skips the rest. So why did one of the most trusted medications in America turn out to carry risks that grow sharper, faster, and harder to reverse the older you get? That question has a very specific answer, and it starts with what happens inside an aging body the moment that first pill dissolves. There is a version of this story where atorvastatin is simply a good drug doing its job. For a 52-year-old with high cholesterol and healthy kidneys, that version holds up reasonably well. But cross the threshold of 70, and the entire equation shifts, quietly, completely, without anyone updating the label. Here is what changes. After 70, kidney and liver function decline naturally, not because of disease, but because of time. The glomerular filtration rate drops. Liver enzyme activity slows. The body's ability to process and clear medications weakens year by year. A dose that moves efficiently through a 50-year-old system can linger far longer in a 75-year-old. That lingering is where the trouble begins. Body composition shifts too. Muscle mass decreases, body fat redistributes. The result is a higher drug concentration per pound of lean tissue, meaning the same 40 milligram tablet delivers a biochemically heavier hit to an older body than it ever would to a younger one. Picture the same volume of water poured into a smaller container. It overflows. That is essentially what is happening at the cellular level. Then there is the polypharmacy problem. The American Heart Association's 2023 updated guidelines quietly acknowledged elevated statin risk in older adults, but the footnote most people miss is this. The average senior over 70 takes 5 or more medications simultaneously: blood pressure drugs, blood thinners, diabetes medications, each one a variable, each one a potential interaction point. Atorvastatin does not operate in isolation. It operates inside a system already under significant pharmaceutical load. Every additional drug in that system is another gear turning against the others, and the friction accumulates. And the nervous system, the immune response, both become more reactive with age, not less. Side effects that a younger adult might shrug off, mild fatigue, occasional confusion, can escalate into something far more serious when the underlying biology has less reserve to absorb the impact. The buffer zone shrinks. The margin for error disappears. This is the origin of the risk, not a flaw in the drug, a mismatch between the population it was tested on and the population now taking it most. The clinical trials that established atorvastatin's safety profile were largely conducted in middle-aged adults. Not 74-year-olds on 6 other medications, not 80-year-olds with declining kidney function. The data that reassured regulators came from a fundamentally different body than the one swallowing the pill today. That mismatch has consequences, 5 of them specifically. And the first one attacks something most people never think to connect to a cholesterol pill. 10 years before the FDA issued its 2012 drug safety communication on statins, researchers were already collecting something troubling: patient reports of memory loss, confusion, and disorientation tied directly to statin use. The reports kept coming. They didn't stop. The FDA's 2012 communication was not a rumor. It was an official label change. The agency required statin manufacturers to add warnings about memory impairment and confusion to their prescribing information. That was over a decade ago. And yet, in exam rooms across the country, seniors are still being handed atorvastatin prescriptions without a single word about what it might do to their thinking. Here is the mechanism. Cholesterol is not just a cardiovascular villain, it is a structural component of the myelin sheath, the protective coating wrapped around nerve fibers in the brain. Myelin enables fast, clean signal transmission between neurons. Without adequate cholesterol, that transmission degrades. Statins work by suppressing cholesterol production system-wide. The liver gets less, the bloodstream gets less, and critically, the brain gets less. For a younger adult, the brain has significant reserve capacity. It compensates. For a senior over 70, that reserve is already reduced. The brain is already working harder to maintain the same cognitive performance it managed effortlessly at 50. Introduce a drug that further restricts the raw material the brain uses to maintain its own wiring, and the margin for error disappears fast. What does this look like in practice? It looks like a 74-year-old woman who starts losing words mid-sentence. Not occasionally, regularly. She reaches for a name she has known for 40 years and finds nothing. She walks into a room and cannot reconstruct why. She misses appointments she wrote down. She sits at the kitchen table in the morning, coffee going cold, trying to remember whether she already took her pills. Her family notices she repeats herself. Not once or twice, every single conversation. Her daughter starts writing things down for her. Her son starts calling more often, not to chat, but to check. Her doctor orders cognitive testing. The results suggest early-stage dementia. The atorvastatin, started 3 months earlier, is never mentioned. It is not on the differential. It is not on the radar. That scenario is not hypothetical. It is the pattern documented in case reports, flagged by researchers, and described explicitly by Dr. Michael Greger, who has warned that cognitive symptoms can appear within weeks of starting or increasing a statin dose. Weeks, not years. The speed of onset is one of the most important diagnostic clues and one of the most consistently overlooked. The problem compounds because the symptoms mimic what everyone already expects from aging. Word-finding difficulty, assumed to be normal, short-term memory gaps, chalked up to getting older, mild disorientation, dismissed. The atorvastatin sits in the weekly pill organizer, untouched as a suspect, while the patient gets referred to a neurologist for a condition that may have a far simpler explanation, which, looking back, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. The assumption that cognitive decline in a 72-year-old on 5 medications must be neurological rather than pharmaceutical. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. The moment a physician writes off drug-induced cognitive impairment as dementia, the patient enters a diagnostic pathway that leads away from the actual cause. Medications get added. Cognitive decline gets monitored. The statin stays. The family adjusts their expectations downward. They start talking about care options. They start grieving someone who is still in the room. The cognitive effects are real, documented, and reversible in many cases when the drug is adjusted or discontinued under medical supervision. Patients who had their statin dose reduced or switched reported meaningful improvement in mental clarity within weeks. The brain, given back its raw material, begins to recover. Words come back, names come back, the fog lifts. Not always completely, not always permanently, but enough to matter, enough to change the conversation. But what nobody saw coming was the second effect, one that doesn't announce itself with confusion or memory gaps, but hides silently in blood sugar numbers, building toward a diagnosis that changes everything. For a while, things actually seemed fine. The memory issues were attributed to stress, to age, to a bad week. That didn't last. The year is 2024. A PubMed meta-analysis lands quietly in the medical literature. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't trend on social media. But buried inside its pages is a finding that should have stopped every prescribing physician cold. High-dose statins increase the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 10 to 22% in seniors. And in patients over 70, that number climbs even higher. What comes next is the part that still doesn't make sense. This risk isn't new. Researchers have flagged it for years. The FDA updated its statin warning labels back in 2012 to include a note about elevated blood sugar 12 years ago. And yet, according to Dr. Elizabeth Boehm, a physician and nutritionist who has worked extensively with aging patients, this risk is almost never discussed during routine checkups. Not mentioned at the pharmacy counter, not printed in bold on the instruction sheet, it is, in the truest sense of the phrase, a hidden side effect. Here is the mechanism, and it is worth understanding. Atorvastatin doesn't just lower cholesterol, it directly impairs insulin secretion from the pancreatic beta cells. These are the cells responsible for sensing blood sugar and releasing the insulin needed to manage it. When those cells are disrupted, they don't sound an alarm, they don't cause pain, they don't trigger any obvious symptom. They simply become less effective. Quietly, gradually, over months and years, the blood sugar creeps upward, point by point, number by number, and here is the truly dangerous part. Unless a physician specifically orders an HbA1c test, a test that measures average blood sugar over a 3-month window, this shift is essentially invisible. A standard cholesterol panel won't catch it. A basic metabolic panel might hint at it, but only if someone is looking. And in most routine appointments with seniors on long-term statin therapy, someone is not looking. Margaret, a 74-year-old retired school teacher from Ohio, had been on 80 milligrams of atorvastatin for 6 years. Her cholesterol numbers were excellent. Her cardiologist was pleased. But in the spring of 2022, her primary care physician happened to order a routine HbA1c test, not because anyone suspected a problem, but because it was on a standard annual panel. The result came back at 6.8, pre-diabetic, borderline, right on the edge. And no, I'm not making that up. 6 years on a high-dose statin, 6 years of gradual beta cell impairment, and the only reason it was caught was a routine checkbox on a lab order form. Margaret's doctor didn't immediately connect it to the statin. Why would he? She was 74, she was slightly overweight, she had a family history. There were plenty of other explanations. The statin was not on the suspect list. This is the pattern that researchers have documented over and over again. The connection gets missed. The diagnosis gets attributed to age, to diet, to genetics. The statin continues, the blood sugar continues to climb. And by the time someone connects the dots, the patient has sometimes already crossed the line from prediabetes into a full type 2 diagnosis. For seniors who already have prediabetes or metabolic syndrome, the risk compounds in a way that is genuinely alarming. These are patients whose insulin regulation is already under stress. Adding a medication that further impairs beta cell function is, in the words of one endocrinologist interviewed for a 2023 clinical review, like pressing on a brake that's already failing. The system doesn't have the reserve to absorb the additional hit. Margaret would look back on this moment and wish she'd made a different call. Not necessarily the decision to take the statin, that was between her and her doctors, but the decision not to ask questions, not to push for regular HbA1c monitoring, not to know that this risk existed in the first place. Because here is what changed for Margaret and for thousands of seniors like her. Once the prediabetes diagnosis arrived, everything shifted. New dietary restrictions, new monitoring requirements, new medications under consideration, a new label attached to her health record that would follow her into every future appointment. What had started as a cholesterol management strategy had quietly opened a second front, one she never consented to, because nobody told her it was possible. The clinical community is not entirely blind to this. Some cardiologists now recommend baseline HbA1c testing before starting high-dose statin therapy in seniors, and regular follow-up testing every 6 to 12 months after. Some don't. There is no universal standard. There is no mandatory disclosure. The warning exists on the label in small print, in language that most patients never read and most physicians never volunteer. Dr. Boehm has said publicly that this conversation needs to happen at the point of prescription, not in a pamphlet, not buried in a drug information sheet, out loud, in the room, before the first pill is swallowed. Patients deserve to know that the medication protecting their heart may simultaneously be placing a quiet but measurable strain on their metabolic system, especially if they are over 70, especially if they already have risk factors. The meta-analysis sits in the database. The data is there for anyone willing to look. A 10 to 22% increased risk is not a footnote. It is not a statistical curiosity. In a population of millions of seniors on high-dose statins, that percentage represents hundreds of thousands of people who may be developing diabetes right now, without knowing why, without being warned, and without any reason to connect it to the little white pill they take every night before bed. Dr. Boham saw it coming. She warned in multiple public forums that routine statin prescribing in seniors over 70 needed to include metabolic monitoring as a non-negotiable standard of care. She said it clearly. She said it repeatedly. Nobody listened. And this is the part where things stop being funny. Because if the diabetes risk is invisible, a slow chemical shift happening in a lab value nobody is tracking, what comes next is different. What comes next, you can feel. In your legs, in your thighs, in the moment you stand up from a chair and something isn't quite right. The chair scrapes back. You push up with both hands. Your legs take a half second longer than they should to respond. You tell yourself it's nothing. You've been sitting too long, you're tired, you're getting older, that's all it is. The real question is what happened behind closed doors. The 2024 Journal of the American Geriatric Society published a finding that deserves to be read aloud in every doctor's office where statins are prescribed to elderly patients. Over 30% of seniors over the age of 70 taking atorvastatin report unexplained muscle weakness. 30%, nearly 1 in 3, not a rare side effect, not an outlier, a pattern so consistent across the data that it cannot be dismissed as coincidence or aging or deconditioning. And yet, in the majority of documented cases, it is dismissed as exactly that. Here is the mechanism, and it is important. Statins deplete CoQ10. Coenzyme Q10 is not a supplement trend or a wellness buzzword. It is a critical enzyme involved in the mitochondrial production of cellular energy. Every muscle in the human body, including the heart, depends on CoQ10 to function. When statin therapy reduces circulating CoQ10 levels, which it does as a direct consequence of the same biochemical pathway it uses to lower cholesterol, the muscles begin to lose their energy supply. Slowly, silently, without inflammation markers that show up on standard blood panels. The weakness starts in the legs, in the thighs specifically. And this is not a random anatomical coincidence. The thighs and the hip flexors are the primary stabilizing muscles for balance and gait. They are the muscles a person uses to stand up from a seated position, to step off a curb, to catch themselves when they stumble. When those muscles begin to weaken, balance becomes unreliable. Steps become hesitant. The margin for error shrinks. Think about that for a second. Falls are the #1 cause of injury death in adults over 65 in the United States. Every year, approximately 36 million falls occur among older adults. Every year, roughly 32,000 of those falls are fatal. The CDC calls it a public health crisis. Researchers have spent decades trying to understand why fall rates remain so stubbornly high despite awareness campaigns and home safety programs and balance training classes. And here, buried in the pharmacological data, is a medication taken by tens of millions of seniors that directly weakens the exact muscles that prevent falls, that depletes the exact enzyme that powers those muscles. And the most common physician response when a senior patient reports that their legs feel weak, that they feel unsteady, that they feel different than they did before they started the medication, is to tell them that this is normal, that it's age, that they should do more exercise. Robert, a 78-year-old retired engineer from Michigan, started atorvastatin 40 milligrams in January of 2021. By that September, he had fallen twice in his home. Both times he attributed it to distraction. A loose rug, a wet floor. His wife was not so sure. She noticed that he was moving differently, more carefully, holding the wall when he walked down the hallway, pausing before he stepped down from the porch, reaching for surfaces that he never used to reach for. In October of 2021, Robert mentioned the weakness to his physician during a routine visit. He described it as his legs feeling like they weren't fully there. His physician ordered a CK test, creatine kinase, the standard marker for muscle damage. The result came back normal. No myopathy, the physician concluded, no statin-related muscle issue, likely deconditioning. Recommended a physical therapist. The physical therapist was excellent. She worked with Robert for 3 months. His strength scores improved modestly, but the weakness never fully resolved because the CoQ10 depletion was ongoing, because the statin was still being taken every night, because no one had connected the timeline, January prescription, September falls, October complaint, into a coherent clinical picture. This is the pattern. The CK test comes back normal. The physician checks the box. The statin is not implicated, but CK elevation only occurs in the most severe cases of statin myopathy. Mild to moderate CoQ10-related weakness can exist entirely below the threshold that a CK test would detect. The test is the wrong tool for the job. And in elderly patients, where baseline muscle mass is already declining, even a small additional reduction in muscle function can be the difference between walking confidently and falling catastrophically. Robert fell again in February of 2022. This time, he fractured his wrist. He was in a cast for 8 weeks. The recovery was harder than expected. He lost further conditioning during that period. He became more sedentary. His mobility declined. His confidence declined. A man who had been active and independent was now hesitant to walk to his mailbox alone. He stopped going to his weekly card game. He stopped taking the dog out in the evenings. He sat more, he moved less, and the less he moved, the weaker he became. His wife did her own research. She found the 2024 Geriatric Society data. She found the CoQ10 connection. She brought it to a new physician, a geriatric specialist. Within 3 months of switching to a lower dose statin and beginning CoQ10 supplementation, Robert's wife reported that he was moving more freely, more confidently. He was walking to the mailbox again. He went back to the card game. He took the dog out, small things, enormous things. But the wrist fracture was already in the past. The 8 weeks of lost mobility were already in the past. The fear, the particular kind of fear that settles into an elderly person's body after a fall, that was still there. It doesn't leave the way a cast comes off. It stays in the hesitation before a step. It stays in the hand that reaches for a wall that isn't there. The same medication that was supposed to be building Robert's cardiovascular protection had quietly been dismantling something else entirely. And the fourth effect, the one that arrives not in the muscles or the memory, but in the deepest reserves of daily energy, was already underway before anyone thought to look. Fatigue is the quiet one. Not the tiredness that follows a long day or a bad night of sleep. Something heavier than that. A fatigue that is present before the day begins. That makes the morning feel like afternoon and the afternoon feel like the end of something. Seniors on long-term high-dose statin therapy describe it in strikingly similar terms across study after study. A heaviness, a flatness, a sense that the body is running on a fraction of what it used to have. And because fatigue in a 75-year-old is the most expected, most dismissed, most easily attributed symptom in all of medicine, it almost never gets investigated. It gets absorbed into the background noise of aging and left there. But the mechanism is the same one that drives the muscle weakness. CoQ10 depletion does not stop at the thighs. It operates system-wide. The mitochondria in every cell, heart cells, brain cells, the cells lining the gut, all depend on CoQ10 to produce ATP, the fundamental currency of biological energy. When CoQ10 drops, ATP production drops. When ATP production drops, everything slows. Not dramatically, not all at once. Gradually. The way a battery drains when you don't notice it happening until the screen goes dark. What changed permanently because of this story is not a single dramatic moment. It is the accumulation of small moments. The senior who stops cooking because standing at the stove for 30 minutes feels impossible. The one who stops calling friends because holding a conversation feels like effort. The one who declines the family trip because the idea of airports and luggage and walking feels like too much. Each of these withdrawals looks, from the outside, like normal aging. Each of them may be something else entirely. The antagonist in this story is not atorvastatin itself. The drug has saved lives. The data on cardiovascular protection is real and it matters. The antagonist is the silence around what the drug also does, particularly to bodies that are older, more vulnerable, and less able to absorb the trade-offs. The antagonist is the system that allows a medication to be prescribed to tens of millions of seniors without a mandatory conversation about cognitive risk, metabolic risk, muscle risk, and energy depletion. The antagonist is the assumption that a drug proven safe in one population is automatically safe in another. That assumption has a reckoning coming. It is already arriving in the form of updated geriatric prescribing guidelines that are beginning slowly to recommend lower doses for older adults, in the form of researchers calling for mandatory CoQ10 monitoring in seniors on statin therapy, in the form of physicians who specialize in aging pushing back against the one-size-fits-all approach that has defined statin prescribing for 30 years. The conversation is changing, not fast enough, but it is changing. What you can do right now is ask a question, not demand a different medication, not stop taking anything without medical guidance. Ask your doctor or the doctor of someone you love whether the current statin dose has been evaluated specifically for an aging body. Ask whether an HbA1c has been checked recently. Ask whether CoQ10 levels have ever been discussed. Ask whether the cognitive symptoms that have been attributed to aging might be worth reconsidering in light of the medication timeline. These are not hostile questions. They are the questions that the research says should already be part of the conversation. They are the questions that Margaret and Robert and the 74-year-old woman losing words mid-sentence deserve to have answered before the first pill was ever swallowed. The little white pill in the medicine cabinet is not the enemy, but it is not the whole story either, and you deserve to know the whole story.